right, it's recording now.
Awesome. So, hello everyone. Welcome again to yet another episode of the journey, the vlog behind the book that you are going to have it hopefully in your hands soon. This is Ed, and I'm here today with Vasco. Hello, Vasco.
Hi, Ed.
So we both are co-authors of the book, and if you have watched the previous video, we talked about one of the challenges that Vasco has personally experienced in authoring the book. And today we are going to making an attempt to overcome that challenge publicly and see
live
and see what we can get, how we can push through that challenge. So Vasco, would you like to talk about the challenge that you were facing to begin with?
Yeah, so I think the challenge that I have is something that every author has, which is how to start chapter 1 so that readers want to download or buy your book and start reading it immediately. So that's the first question in my mind, and I have actually been struggling with the start of chapter 1. I've written the second half of chapter 1 already, so I'm pretty happy with that, but I'm not happy yet with the first part of chapter 1. So that's what we are struggling with right now.
So for the readers here who haven't watched the previous video, you don't know what we are talking about, just to cover a quick background. We are writing a book and releasing it to our beta readers as we write it. And when you do such a campaign, you at least need to have something to give to your readers when they sign up for beta reading. And so that this first chapter, it may not be the first chapter of the book, it can be any chapter, but it's the first chapter that you release to your beta readers. And that's the one that Vasco is talking about.
Yeah, and because it is the first chapter we release, it actually offers quite a few challenges for the author, right? So I mean, we can imagine that in the middle of the book, you will be going through the technical aspects of the, expertise you're sharing with your audience. And of course, we're talking about nonfiction books here. But in the beginning, you have a specific challenge because it is the first chapter you offer your readers. So you need to use that as a way for them to discover what the book is about, and also to understand that the book is relevant for them, that it has something to give them, because they are the reader, right? If they're not interested, that's that's it. They won't read the whole book. They will not be interested in that. So it's the chapter you offer for free right at the start, as you said, and it helps people discover the book. And therefore, it's super important that we focus on conveying a message that the reader empathizes with, that the reader says, okay, that's the message I care about. I want to know the answer to these questions that the author is writing about.
Yeah, and one of the things that is an assumption behind Vasco saying that is the easy part when you start to write something is to talk about yourself or to talk about things that you would like to read. A common problem for me as well, really. The person who's coming to read, they want to see the world from your lens, but the way they are experiencing it. Again, your perspective, your ideas are there to give them another perspective, not make them live your life or experience the life the way you do.
Yeah, because it's their life.
Exactly.
Right. It's not the author's life, it's the reader's life.
Yeah, and that adds to the challenge. It ups the challenge, and it's real.
Yeah. So that's actually the topic number 2, right? Is that it is hard enough to start chapter 1, but chapter 1 is also where the first hook is. It's the hook that makes the reader want to read your book. And of course, the hook has to be a story that the reader is going through, a challenge or an odyssey that the reader is going through. It has to offer a hook, or the first chapter has to offer a hook that the reader says, this is me, right? It puts the reader at the center of that story. And that's why it's so hard, because as you said, Ed, it's very easy to write about us because we have our experience, we have our story, we know all about that because we lived through it. But the point is that it's not really the author's story that is in the book, it is the reader's story. Because if it isn't the reader's story, the reader won't care.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one of the challenges for the authors, is to make sure that it is the reader's story that is being depicted through your own experience and sharing your own expertise, obviously, but it is the reader's story. And that hook is lesson number 2, right? It's like you need to find that hook that brings the reader back into the story and allows the reader to feel, okay, this is about me. This is about what I want.
Yeah. So we talked about hook. We talked about the reader. And we talked about writing the first chapter, but there's one crucial step which comes before any of these come in place. You may start with any of these, but then you have to pivot back to that first step, the crucial first step. And that is identifying your customer avatar or reader avatar or audience avatar. If you want to speak in your conferences, that's pretty obvious. People who will listen to you on stage could be your audience avatar. So to begin with that point, Vasco, you want to discuss a little bit more on that point?
Yeah, so I'll actually share our avatar. So as part of our process, we actually studied who our avatar was. And that's Jennifer. Jennifer is our avatar. She has between 5 and 10 years experience in her field and wants to develop her career by being invited to conferences. There's a number of benefits that come out of that. Of course, the first one, most obvious, is recognition from your peers, but that's not the only thing that matters. It's also much easier to get the job you want if people already know you before you go to the interview, right? Ed, you shared in last episode how having just author of book X in your CV got you a lot more job interviews than before you had that line in your CV. So that's a very important part. So our avatar, Jennifer, has also been using social media, engaging with her peers through social media, perhaps has already some following, but the blog, she's not keeping up to date. I mean, she wrote a few articles, but not really developing a lot there. So that's our avatar. What we have now being shared is the picture of the empathy map we did for our avatar. And we based it completely on the answers to a survey, which is a process we go through. The survey is the SMIQ survey that maybe, Ed, you can explain a little bit more of what that consists of. And we asked 2 specific questions. I can go through the questions, but tell us a little bit more of what is that SMIQ, or single most important question survey.
Yeah. So when I was doing MBA, there was a book, there's a thick book about survey, customer research and stuff. That works for big corporates and the companies you probably work for. But then if you are an author, you don't need like big list of questions. There's only one and only one question that you should care about at this stage. And that is to help you discover more about this customer avatar. And that is the challenge. There are too many solutions to every challenges, but to pinpoint the right challenge they're facing or the right challenge that you want to help them solve is the crucial first step. And it's the make or break of your whole author or speaking proposition. It will give you all the material you will need, at least in the bullet points list, for what will go inside those chapters. If you need to do more research further to fill that information, it will also give you that direction. Okay, we need to find research about this, and things like that. So that comes from one question, that is, when it comes to X could be when it comes to getting invited to speak in conferences. It could be when it comes to your better career development, or when it comes to getting consulting gigs or consulting clients, whatever. Fill the X that you want to serve, and what is the number one challenge or frustration you're facing right now. This is a required question. Then there's the second question that supports this question, but it's not a required, it's an optional, that if you have that information, it's good. And that is, what have you tried to solve this problem? And what, according to you, are make it difficult for you.
And by the way, we'll put the template of our SMIQ on the group. It's almost like an e-course for writing a book. So just sign up below. There's a link, and you can just sign up and get access to all of the videos, as well as the bonus material and templates we're going to share. The two questions we asked were, what do you want to accomplish as an end goal by publishing a book? So like, this is about understanding what's Jennifer's motivation, right? So if we are going to write for Jennifer, we need to know what she wants to achieve. And we got a lot of answers. Some of those are in the gain section here of this empathy map, like invited to speak at conferences. That turns out to be reason number one for our avatar, but also change jobs easily, develop my personal brand, earn an income from book sales. So that's not a very common thing, but some are, of course, interested in that. And then also to get a better consulting gigs. So all consultants gain from having a book out there, doing their work for them, to talk about who they are and what their expertise is. And then the second question was, when it comes to publishing your knowledge and expertise, what is the number one challenge you are facing right now? And that's what Ed just mentioned. And by the way, the number one challenge we are facing right now is starting chapter 1, so that Jennifer, as she picks up the book, understands that the book is for her, that it tells her story, right?
Right. So a trick I played in another book that I'm authoring was that instead of writing it myself, I actually bought a written part from someone who's more professional than me on that particular industry, but more on that later. Here's when you are sitting and writing, and then you have to go through the process. So Vasco, whenever you're ready, we can jump into the discovery interview of what to write.
All right, let's do this.
Oh, awesome. So maybe you want to stop sharing the screen, or you want to keep it up?
Now I'll stop sharing. People can download the PDF and walk us through, or walk through the empathy map as we go through this on their own screens.
Okay, cool. I'm your customer avatar. I'm Jennifer, without lipstick.
Or long hair.
Or long hair, modern, gothic. So the challenge I'm facing is I want to get invited to speak in conferences at any level to begin with, or I want to approach the organizers of conferences in a way that put me in the best light possible, that they accept me as a speaker, whether it's for paid gigs, ideally for paid speaking opportunities, but also to begin with, any speaking opportunity that I would like myself to be highlighted in.
So as I started writing chapter 1, I of course started with my own example. That's how I got started. I started writing, at that time it was a blog, not a book. And I started using that to get recognized, and of course also sharing my experience. But then when I think about Jennifer, I have a hard time starting to write so that it doesn't sound like it's my story. So that's my challenge, right? So I've tried a few things. I've used the motivation so that, Jennifer wants to be invited to speak at conference. So I started writing from that perspective. So you want to be invited speaking at conference. But then I think that most readers will not yet be at that stage. I mean, they have considered that, but they don't necessarily say, okay, now I want to get invited, right? They're thinking, okay, how can a book help me? So right now, what I'm trying to struggle with is how to write the beginning of chapter 1 so that I put Jennifer in that perspective of, okay, so what can a book do for me? She already has that idea in the back of her mind of getting better clients if she's a consultant, or getting invited at conferences if she wants to be recognized as an expert. So I know that that is there, that is in her mind, but I want to start the chapter so that it doesn't feel like, here's my story. It feels more like, here's your story.
Okay.
Like that's the difficulty for me here.
Okay, so Vasco, I would like to put you in a virtual box So you don't have to think outside the box. In fact, you have to think inside the box now, the box that I will put you in. And outside the box are things like, okay, what should I write about the chapter? What should they care about? Your customers, your readers care about, and things like that. So for inside the box, let's first identify the right story that resonates with my need. My need is, how can a book help me getting invited to a speaking gig? Let's find a story of yours. Let's see if we can explore that. We are going to talk about purely about you, not about your customers, nothing about your readers, just about you. So in your experience, what was the first speaking gig that you got after the book? After you published your first book?
I actually got quite a few speaking gigs before I published the book. And I started writing the book publicly about 2 years before I published it. And I remember I published the first 2 chapters as a download. And of course, the discussion around No Estimates, that was the book I was writing at the time, was already going on in social media. So there's a lot of also other things that are going on, right? So maybe for me, what was clear is that, okay, there's a lot of interest in answering those questions. You know, how do you develop software and deliver products on time without using estimates as the tool to do that? And I knew because of the interest that was there, that if I would explain how, I would get a lot of people interested in reading the book. So actually, it's funny because when I started writing that book, I knew exactly who I was writing for, because it was me 10 years ago or 10 years before. So
okay.
that's perhaps one of the things here, is that I have not actually thought about Jennifer's story before starting to write this book. I am writing for Jennifer now. And at that time, I was literally writing for me. It's just that there was a lot of people, and there still are a lot of people like me that are struggling with estimates.
Did you realize you're just outside the box again?
Yes.
Let me bring you back to the box. Let me ask you the question again. What was the first time you got invited? Now, let's pick any scenario, before or after writing. What was the first time you were invited to speak at the conference?
So the first time I got invited was because I submitted talks about a specific topic. And I'll talk about one specific here, and that was, again, about No Estimates. Before I started writing the book, this was just on the blog. So I published the blog.
You wrote about it in the blog.
Yeah, I wrote about it in the blog. Let's say a blog post is like a section in a book, for example.
Cool.
I wrote about it in the blog, and then based on that, I made a few contacts with other people in the industry. We actually co-wrote the talk for that specific conference. So we submitted the conference talk summary, and then got invited to go there and present it. So that's how it happened.
Cool. So when you went on the stage, what were you feeling about the process that you have done that bring you on that stage?
So I wasn't really thinking about the process of getting to that stage, but I was thinking about the process of getting recognized in that specific area of expertise. So it wasn't about the stage, it was more about being recognized as someone who has something to contribute to the industry in that area.
Okay, so let's talk about this. On the stage, when you went on to speak, what were your feelings? Were you related to, I'm talking about feelings specifically. I'm not talking about the facts and figures. I'm talking about feelings. Your feelings about, actually, before you went on the stage, what were you feeling that when you decided that you want to speak? How easy did you think it would be? How difficult you thought it would be?
I thought it was very hard because it was a very controversial topic. I knew there was going to be a lot of skeptics in the audience.
So you find it hard that way because the topic that you picked was a little controversial and you were expecting rejection, if that's correct?
I was expecting objections, yes.
Okay. And so it was a hard topic, it was a controversial topic, and you still got invited. What were you feeling about that?
I think I got invited because it was a controversial topic.
Wow. Okay.
So that's maybe a lesson learned from my own stories right there, is that if you have something in your expertise that others feel is controversial, but it works for you, you're going to get noticed.
Okay, great. I'm going to bring you back inside the box because we're going to talk about all the learnings in a minute. But I'm just extracting your stories, your bits and pieces of stories that readers like me will definitely go through when we are in that phase, or we have actually gone through. So once you gave the talk, once you finished the talk, what were your feelings about the future potential of you as a speaker? Did it became clear to you that this is easy from now on, or it was still a constant innovation struggle and things?
I think that for me at that point, it was more about being an author, not a speaker. I was quite sure I was going to speak at conferences. In fact, in one of the drafts I wrote for chapter 1, I knew that that was one of the goals. That's why I wrote the blog posts and so on. I knew I was going to be invited because I already had a lot of confirmation that people wanted, of course, not just me talking at the conference, but talking about that specific topic or those topics. So I didn't have any doubts about that. I think that after the book, I understood, after the first talk on this topic, I understood that there was a book there that needed to be written.
Okay. Why did you decide to become a speaker in the first place? What was your why?
So for me, it was very simple. I wanted to be recognized in my field of expertise, and that was software product development and project management.
Why you wanted to be recognized?
Main goals were, of course, employability, or just inside your own company, how to grow your career. The other thing is that I'm very much a person that likes to develop one topic in depth rather than many topics shallow. And that usually drives me to write about it. So I had been writing blog posts for a while. Then when Twitter came along, I started writing a lot of tweets about those topics. It just became easier with Twitter. So shorter format, kind of just a punchline, as it were. So I also knew the power that it could have to be an author, because I could see the type of feedback I was getting from blog posts and so on. So that was, for me, it was to be recognized and to be employable. But I knew that speaking at public events, conferences, was one way to get there much faster.
Yeah. Okay. Coming back to the book. So why were you, I mean, I know that you were good at, you were writing blogs, you were writing thingy, but why speaking? You said
because it was going to get me that.
Why employability? Or
Yeah.
other things?
Okay, so the why speaking? Because it would give me, as an employee, it would give me a lot more value.
You were an employee at that time.
I was an employee at that time, and for a few years after that still. So I knew it was going to give me that value, and it did. I eventually got a job that I wanted because I was a public speaker.
Okay. And what was that job?
That job at that time was working with a team that was leading a transformation at a very large telco company in Finland.
Right. Cool. And why did you decide to become author for the first time, whenever you decided for your first book? I know you were a blogger, you were a micro-blogger, but why an author?
I thought the book would be, I thought that the book is an easier way to get more people to notice who you are and learn about what you have to share. So going to conferences is something that it gives you employability, it gives you more value as an employee or a consultant. It gives you recognition in your community, that's for sure. But in a conference, you can speak maybe to 100 people or 1,000 people. And right now, my book sells thousands of copies per year, plus the free copies that are downloaded in certain events. Like I give the book away for free to people who see my talks, for example.
But that happened now, once you've authored the book, before you authored the book.
That was the motivation, is that if I go to a conference, and I was going to something like 10 to 12 conferences a year at that time, I can talk to 100 people, 100 to 1,000, but it's mostly 100 people on average per talk. But if I publish the book, I can immediately reach thousands of people.
What gave you that confidence that if you publish the book, you will immediately reach thousands of people? Did you see somebody else doing it? Did you thought about different options and this came out as the top? What was the logic behind that?
Yeah, so those are two stories I share in the first chapter. The part of the chapter that I'm confident will work is the stories of Jürgen Apelo and Jason Little, who wrote their books and, of course, reached many thousands of people with their book. In both cases, helped them to build their own business as a workshop, the workshop business, training business. In one case, it helped a person become right now one of the most well-known authors in the Agile field. And in the other case, it helped somebody to bring Agile knowledge to an industry that was not Agile before. That's change management.
Right.
So it was clear from me, and I actually worked with them both at that time. With Jason, I actually helped him write his first book with Happy Valley Express. So that became clear for me that, okay, so if I want to find a job on my own, like either be a consultant or just be, let's call it a free agent, so somebody who finds the job they want to write to work on and then just applies and gets the job, that would be, writing a book would be the right way to do it.
Okay, one last question. I was about to close the box, but then this just gave me one more burning question. That is, how difficult or easy was finding the job that you wanted before you were either a speaker or an author? How is it different?
So for me, there's two aspects here. There's one transition, which is from having a job to having the job you want. That was speaking publicly. So that was transition number one. And then from being an employee to being an employer, having my own company. And that was writing a book.
Wow. Let's close the box and compile what we get out of this small interview. And by the way, this is easier for me as an interviewer to do to you than it is to do to myself. So just acknowledge that. Thank you for sharing. I know it was difficult for you to talk about yourself a little bit, and I have to extract a lot of whys behind why you're doing what, because you have a bias towards logic. So like you go very quickly on the logical connections and logical sequencing, but then what get undervalued is your emotions. And those were the actual reasons why even the logics were in first place, to support those emotions. And those were that you wanted to have the last two things that you just finished, that one, a better a job of a choice, that the speaking gig help you, or becoming a speaker help you, and then transition to become an employer from an employee, or get even like continue the journey of finding better jobs, and then eventually becoming big enough to become an employer. Those were the two motivations that you had. And the story, your story, I believe, begins with you going on a stage and thinking about the past, that like this is like a line on turning point in your life before you went on the stage for the first time and after? So before that, it was difficult to get invited. In fact, it was difficult to find a job of your choice. And then you found a way, like, maybe I can experiment with this speaking, and did the speaking. That gave you further speaking opportunities, and that gave you opportunity to pick and choose which company you want to work with. And it gives you kind of a negotiation power. That's my assumption, purely negotiation power in whether you want to join or not join, whether this is a good company or not, instead of just accepting whoever comes next, right? That kind of power. So that gave you that power. And then in order to progress it further, to take it to the next level, you found that if I become an author, that would establish my home base. Now you can take that home base anywhere, whether you want to continue your employment, like a lot of C-level executives have books by their name. A lot of management books are written by people already still employed in companies, big companies, or they progress using that book. To me, book is real life equivalent of doing an MBA. So I get more respect from the fact that
it's a lot harder to write the book than it is to do an MBA, I have to say.
Yeah, you just pay the money and then show up. You'll do the MBA. Well, I don't 100% agree, because I did wrote a 50,000 word essay in the end.
Well, I mean, so writing essays is something that is hard in MBAs. I'm not saying that, and doing an MBA is hard enough, but writing a book puts you out there. It's not enough that you're good at what you do. You now have to be able to convey that in an articulated way and be credible in the arguments that you make. Yeah. While in an MBA, you are going through a study program. Yeah. There are right answers in an MBA, but being an author, there are no right answers. You have to discover those on your own.
Yeah. So I would assume from the interview that we just did, there'll be two big stories in that first chapter, your stories. The first one is your first experience with the speaking gig, and what before and after, what changed. And then the lessons learned for the audience, for a reader like me, from that was speaking changed things for you. And this is where all those things that you were talking outside the box at that time was that, it establishes you as an authority. You are seen as somebody who's knowledgeable and stuff like that. But then the limitation with speaking, at least for you, was that you wanted to impact more. And it alone, because of the progression, it alone didn't help you to go to become an employer. So then you came up with a solution, authoring, becoming an author. And that solution brings to the next story, which is your transition from being an employee to an employer, and the before scenario and the after scenario, and the learnings that we discussed here. Now, because the way we are promoting the book is more, it's more like you can actually reverse the sequence and get invited, because it was so difficult for you to get invited to speak in the first place. The lesson learned was like, yeah, one trick that you can teach people is go for controversial topic, right?
That you know about, by the way.
Sorry?
A controversial topic that you really know a lot about.
Yes, and every one of us knows some things about things that, like, everyone else believes to be true, and it's not true.
Which we will talk about in future episodes, because there's a lot of stuff that is said about writing books that just is plain wrong.
Yeah. So what do you feel about that as the structure of your first chapter?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of good hooks there. So I think starting the action as, whoa, I'm on stage. How did I get here? I think that's a great way to start. I think Jennifer wants to be that. Jennifer wants to be on stage, and of course, therefore, needs to reflect on what will bring her there. And the second transformation is something that may be later on important in the book, but I'm not so comfortable with writing about that second transformation in chapter 1, because I want to write about the first goal of our avatar, which is
here's an idea for you.
Seeing herself on stage and asking, okay, so how did I get here?
Yeah, here's an idea for you. I think you should include that part in the first chapter. And then there's a third part as well that we didn't talk about that you should include. And that is the big realization that connects the dots between your journey, which was speaking first, book second, authoring second, to the thing that we are encouraging people to do now, which is book first, speaking second. And that realization was that once you authored the book, the experience and the opportunities that open up that make you realize, and that's true, by the way, that make you realize that actually you should have written the book way before you became a speaker, that the whole journey would be much easier. And that's exactly what we helped other people do as well. While I was working with you in Oikosofi for 1.5 years, that's exactly what we were helping people. They author a book and they get invited to speak at conferences.
All right. Okay. So we need to finish because we're out over time now. Next, we will talk about how we actually use the SMIQ to figure out what the book should have, like what are the parts of the book and what should the content be for Jennifer. So we'll talk about that next.
Awesome. And don't forget to subscribe, follow, sign up, whatever is near.
Yeah, all the bonus material we talked about, like the SMIQ, the empathy map, and then later on the story map and everything, those will be on the membership site, which is free. Just sign up below and you'll get all of that.
Yeah, so that's the perk of being a beta reader. Thank you very much.